Racist woman pointed fingers at Big Shaq for crashing his own car, but the real story was burning underneath the pavement. A setup, a spark, and a life-or-death twist no one saw coming. When false blame meets true courage, only one truth survives. Big Shaq didn't just defend his name, he pulled racist woman from the fire meant to silence her forever. What began as a lie ended in a revelation that could shake an entire town. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. Big Shaq had always been a towering figure, not just for his legendary status on the basketball court, but for his gentle presence in the community. That morning he eased into the driver's seat of his mint-condition, cherry-red classic Cadillac, the sun catching the gleam of the hood as he turned the key. The engine rumbled to life with a smooth purr, and he rolled down the window savoring the mild breeze that carried the scent of cut grass and blooming dogwoods. As he cruised down the familiar streets of the suburban neighborhood, heads turned, children playing in their front yards waved, their faces lighting up with excitement. Retirees tending to rose gardens nodded appreciatively. Shopkeepers paused to watch his car glide by, acknowledging him with a respectful wave. Shaq responded with his signature smile, a wave of his own, and a booming but warm good morning that echoed with genuine affection. This was his home, a community where he had given back time and again, funding after-school programs, sponsoring local sports teams, and lending his presence to neighborhood cleanups. The Cadillac's radio played a soft R&B track, but beneath the music the hum of a news report caught his attention. The announcer's voice, steady but edged with tension, detailed a recent string of racially charged incidents in the town. Local businesses had been defaced with graffiti, and a neighborhood association meeting had devolved into shouts and accusations. Shaq's hands tightened briefly on the wheel, a flicker of concern passing over his face. He knew all too well the weight of such tensions and the unspoken expectations placed on him as both a public figure and a black man in America. He pulled up to a four-way stop, glancing at the neatly trimmed lawns and American flags fluttering in the morning breeze. On one corner, a new bakery was setting out its chalkboard sign, the scent of fresh bread wafting toward his open window. Across the street, a group of teenagers skateboarded lazily, their laughter mingling with the faint clatter of wheels on pavement. It all seemed so ordinary, but the words from the radio lingered, casting a subtle shadow over the morning's bright sheen. Shaq rolled forward, nodding at a jogger passing by, and turned onto a quiet street lined with towering oaks. He wasn't headed anywhere specific, just enjoying the ride, clearing his head before the day's demands. But as he cruised down the road, a subtle shift in the air caught his attention. A white SUV, glinting under the sun like a polished blade, appeared from a side street ahead. It wasn't speeding, but there was a peculiar hesitation in its movements, a jerky stop and go as though the driver were uncertain or distracted. Shaq slowed, giving the SUV plenty of space. He could see the driver now, a woman with platinum blonde hair, impeccably dressed, her designer sunglasses flashing. Her lips moved rapidly as though she were talking, maybe to someone in the car, maybe on a call. The SUV drifted slightly over the dividing line, the tires brushing the faded yellow paint, before it jerked back into its lane. Shaq's brows knit together in concern, and he tapped the brakes, preparing to give her space to correct herself. The radio murmured on, the news report fading into a commercial for a local car dealership. But Shaq's attention was locked on the road. He recognized the woman now, Cassandra Whitmore, a well-known figure in the community for both her wealth and her sharp tongue. They had crossed paths at charity events, where she had a habit of speaking just loud enough to be heard, her words laced with subtle jabs. Still, Shaq had always treated her with the same respectful courtesy he offered to everyone. Today, however, her demeanor seemed more frantic than poised. The SUV inched forward, then lurched, the brake lights flashing. Shaq slowed further, but as he approached the intersection where their paths would cross, Cassandra's vehicle abruptly swerved toward him. The Cadillac's brakes squealed as he brought it to a swift stop, his hand steady on the wheel. The SUV skidded slightly, tires screeching against the asphalt, before it came to a shuddering halt, angled awkwardly, front bumper just inches from the Cadillac's gleaming chrome. For a moment, everything stilled. Shaq exhaled slowly, heart steady but muscles tensed, waiting to see what Cassandra would do. She flung open her door, stepping out in a swirl of designer silk and perfume. Her voice, high-pitched and sharp, sliced through the morning air. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, pointing an accusatory finger at him. You hit me. You need to move your car. Shaq remained seated, his expression calm but edged with disbelief. He knew the truth of what had happened, that he had stopped, that she had veered into his lane. But her voice carried, and heads turned. A woman watering her garden, a few houses down, froze, hose in hand. A man walking his dog paused mid-step, his gaze shifting between Cassandra and Shaq. The teenager on his skateboard stopped, curiosity flashing across his face. Shaq opened his door slowly, stepping out into the sun. His towering frame cast a long shadow across the street, but his posture was measured, his voice even. "Ma'am, I didn't hit your car," he said, his tone firm but respectful. "Your vehicle swerved. I stopped to avoid you." Cassandra's face flushed with indignation, her lips tightening. "Don't lie to me. I saw you. You were driving too fast, and you weren't paying attention. You people always think you can get away with anything." The words hung in the air, sharp and cutting, drawing a low gasp from the onlookers. Shaq's jaw clenched, but he kept his voice calm. "That's not what happened," he said quietly. But the damage was done. The morning's tranquility fractured, the subtle tension in the air snapping taut. A silence followed, heavy and expectant, as if the entire street were holding its breath. Shaq glanced briefly at the gathering neighbors, at the wary eyes and hesitant glances, and he felt the weight of a narrative already spiraling beyond his control. The radio in his car continued to play softly, a song fading into static as the sun climbed higher, casting long, sharp shadows across the scene. The morning's fragile calm fractured in a heartbeat. Shaq's Cadillac jolted to an abrupt halt as Cassandra Whitmore's luxury SUV lurched wildly into his lane. The screech of tires carved through the air, followed by a sharp metallic crunch as the SUV's side scraped along a battered curb. For a moment the world held still, an echo of shock reverberating through the suburban street. Then Cassandra flung open her door, her heels clacking against the asphalt. As she stepped out, her silk scarf fluttering in the sudden breeze, her voice, sharp and shrill, cut through the hush. "You reckless fool. You hit my car," she shouted, waving an accusing finger at Shaq. Her words were brittle, her tone high-pitched with indignation, as though the sheer force of her accusation could rewrite the truth. Shaq's jaw tensed, but he kept his posture relaxed, one hand resting on the Cadillac's gleaming hood as he stepped out. His deep voice, steady and calm, carried down the street. "I stopped to avoid you," he said, his words precise, a quiet assertion against the growing tide of onlookers. But Cassandra wasn't listening. Her designer sunglasses flashed as she turned to the gathering neighbors, her voice rising, carrying a hint of false fragility. "He was speeding. He cut me off. He could have killed me." The accusations hung in the air, charged with an undercurrent that made the neighbors shift uneasily. A woman on her porch murmured to her husband, her voice low but pointed. A delivery driver, stopped at the corner, pulled out his phone, the red recording light blinking to life. Shaq's stomach clenched, not from fear, but from the bitter familiarity of the script being played out. His presence, his size, his very identity had suddenly become a weapon turned against him. Still, he remained composed, his voice quiet but firm. "You veered into my lane, ma'am. I stopped to prevent a collision." "Are you all right?" The words were measured, each one weighed carefully against the escalating tension. Cassandra's cheeks flushed crimson beneath her makeup, her lips trembling as though on the verge of tears. "You don't get to intimidate me with your size and your lies," she snapped, her voice cracking under the strain. Her SUV, its pristine exterior now marred by a long scrape along the passenger side, sat askew against the curb. The neighborhood's whispers grew louder, fed by Cassandra's theatrics and the unspoken biases lingering just beneath the surface. Shaq exhaled slowly, glancing around. His Cadillac, though stopped safely, was now caught in the gravity of Cassandra's accusations. The moment felt thick with the weight of judgment, a silent verdict forming in the minds of those who stood at the edges of the scene. But then, something caught his eye, a glint of light, subtle and fleeting, from beneath Cassandra's SUV. He stepped closer, his brows knitting together. Squatting down slightly, he peered beneath the vehicle, and his pulse quickened. There, just beyond the rear axle, a faint shimmer of liquid pooled on the asphalt. It wasn't from the SUV itself. It was a thin stream, seeping from a crack in the road, carrying with it the faint, unmistakable scent of gasoline. The realization struck him with cold clarity. This wasn't just a fender bender, it was the symptom of a deeper problem. "Ma'am," Shaq said, his voice low but urgent, cutting through her tirade. "There's a gas leak under your car. It's not from your tank, it's coming from the road itself." Cassandra, her fury momentarily derailed, blinked at him in confusion. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, her voice wavering with disbelief. Shaq straightened, glancing around for witnesses. "There's an old pipeline under this street," he said, his tone calm but carrying a subtle edge of warning. "I've seen city crews working on it before. If that line's ruptured, this isn't about a fender bender. It's a hazard." The neighbors' murmurs shifted, confusion rippling through the crowd. The delivery driver lowered his phone slightly, his brow furrowing. A retired man in a golf shirt edged closer, squinting at the faint sheen on the pavement. Cassandra's defiance wavered, her indignation flickering under the weight of this new information. "Call 911, Shaq said, his voice steady but commanding. "This street's not safe. We need the fire department, gas company, someone who can shut this down before it gets worse." His presence, once cast as a threat by Cassandra's accusations, now transformed into a calm authority, his concern genuine and palpable. Cassandra hesitated, her lips parting as though to protest, but then the scent reached her, a faint acrid sting in the air. Her eyes widened, and her voice dropped to a whisper. "Oh my God," she murmured, her hands trembling as she fumbled for her phone. The gathered neighbors shifted, their earlier judgment dissolving into a tense collective unease. Shaq stepped back, giving space as Cassandra dialed frantically. His gaze swept the street, noting the growing sheen of liquid under her SUV, the subtle tremor in the air as the breeze shifted. The morning sun, once bright and carefree, now cast long, distorted shadows across the pavement. The tension, no longer born of whispered accusations, hung heavy with the weight of an impending disaster. The first twist had revealed itself, not just a collision of cars and egos, but the quiet threat of something far more dangerous lurking beneath the surface. And as the sirens in the distance grew louder, Shaq felt the weight of the moment settle squarely on his shoulders. This wasn't just a story about blame or accusation. It was about seeing deeper, acting faster, and understanding that the truth was rarely as simple as it seemed. The moment Cassandra Whitmore's trembling fingers tapped the screen of her phone, her voice climbed, high-pitched and quivering with false vulnerability. The call to the police carried through the tense air like a signal flare, a declaration that sent a wave of uncertainty rippling through the crowd. Shaquille Big Shaq O'Neal, standing by his classic Cadillac, watched as her face contorted in a mix of indignation and fear. Her words came rapid and desperate, layered with just enough distress to tilt the balance of onlookers' perception. "He's aggressive. He's blocking me. I'm scared," she cried into the phone, her gaze flickering toward Shaq as if daring him to contradict her. Shaq's hands remained at his sides, his posture relaxed but his mind racing. The murmurs from the gathering neighbors rose into a low hum, uneasy and uncertain. A few stepped closer, drawn by the unfolding drama, their expressions shifting from curiosity to suspicion. The delivery driver's phone stayed up, capturing the scene in unsteady, jerking frames. A woman with a stroller backed away, her eyes darting between Cassandra's theatrical gestures and Shaq's calm demeanor. He spoke slowly, his voice measured and clear. "There's no threat here. I'm not blocking anyone. I stopped to help. There's a gas leak under the road. We need emergency services, not accusations." But his words, despite their rational tone, seemed to dissipate in the charged air, swept away by Cassandra's escalating narrative. Her voice broke with practiced emotion, painting herself as a victim of circumstance and fear. "He's lying. He was driving crazy. I was just trying to get home," she shouted, her hands gesturing wildly. Shaq felt a tightness coil in his chest, a mix of frustration and resignation. He had been in situations like this before, moments where the truth was twisted not by evidence but by perception. The same faces that had waved to him that morning now carried flickers of doubt, whispers exchanged under breath. The same community that had once embraced him seemed in that moment to teeter on the edge of turning against him. Then, as his eyes swept the scene, a detail caught his attention. Near the corner where Cassandra's SUV had skidded, the temporary road barriers set up for construction were misaligned. The orange cones, which should have marked the edge of a safe detour, were scattered and toppled as if someone had moved them deliberately. His gaze narrowed, his instincts sharpening. It wasn't just an errant SUV and a gas leak. It was starting to feel orchestrated. Shaq's voice cut through the rising din, low but resonant. Someone's messed with the barriers. This isn't just an accident. Look, those cones aren't where they should be. His words hung in the air, challenging the growing assumption that he was at fault. But Cassandra's frantic gestures drowned out his logic. He's trying to shift the blame. He's making up stories, she shrieked, her tone brittle but commanding. The neighbors' murmurs swelled into a discordant chorus. Some exchanged nervous glances, unsure whom to believe. Others edged closer to Cassandra, drawn by the drama and her insistent narrative. A man in a suit, stepping from a nearby parked car, folded his arms and muttered to his companion, "Well, you know how these things go." The comment, low but pointed, rippled outward, feeding the undercurrent of bias already simmering beneath the surface. Shaq's pulse quickened, not from fear but from the bitter recognition of the pattern unfolding. He stepped back slightly, creating space between himself and the gathering crowd, his towering frame steady but his expression darkening. His voice, though soft, carried a quiet authority. "I've lived here longer than most of you. You've seen me on this street, at charity events, helping your kids with their school fundraisers. You know me. This isn't who I am." His gaze met those of his neighbors, searching for a flicker of understanding amidst the rising tide of suspicion. Cassandra, seizing the moment, pressed the phone closer to her ear, her voice turning tearful. "Yes, officers, please hurry. He's getting aggressive. He's huge, and I feel threatened." The word threatened fell like a stone into the crowd, setting off a ripple of unease. A few people stepped back, their eyes widening as if Shaq's sheer size had suddenly become a weapon. In the distance, the faint wail of approaching sirens underscored the mounting tension. The delivery driver's camera shifted to capture the flashing lights. As they crested the hill, Shaq exhaled slowly, the weight of decades of navigating such moments pressing down on his shoulders. But this time, something felt different, a thread of unease pulling at the edges of his mind. The misaligned barriers, the sudden leak, the timing of Cassandra's accusation, it all hinted at a deeper, more calculated intent. As the first police cruiser rolled into view, its lights strobing against the neat facades of suburban homes, Shaq squared his shoulders. He wasn't just facing a false accusation, he was staring down a system primed to believe the worst of him. His thoughts turned not just to his own safety, but to the truth he needed to uncover. Someone had set this up, and he was determined to find out who and why. The sirens grew louder, a sharp crescendo that sliced through the thickening air. The gathering storm was no longer metaphorical. It was a collision of prejudice, manipulation, and unseen forces, and Shaq stood at the eye of it, his resolve hardening with every step the officers took toward the scene. Officer Grant Wallace's cruiser rolled to a stop with a screech of tires, the blue and red lights cutting through the crowd like jagged glass. The doors swung open, and Wallace, tall and lean with a practiced authority, strode toward the scene. His mirrored sunglasses flashed as he surveyed the gathering, his gaze landing first on Cassandra, who rushed toward him with exaggerated relief. Her voice, brittle and cracking with emotion, filled the tense air. "Officer, thank God you're here. He's threatening me. He hit my car and now he's trying to intimidate me," she cried, her hands fluttering as if to paint herself as the wronged party. Wallace's expression hardened as he turned toward Shaq, his jaw tightening. "Sir, step back," he commanded, his tone clipped and cold. Shaq raised his hands slightly, palms open in a universal gesture of compliance, though his eyes met Wallace's with a steady calm. "Officer, there's more to this than you think," he said quietly. But Wallace's focus had already narrowed, his ears tuned more to Cassandra's shaky accusations than to Shaq's measured explanation. The murmurs from the crowd thickened, whispers mingling with the sharp scent of gasoline still seeping from beneath the road. The neighbors, once familiar and friendly, now stood at a cautious distance, their gazes shifting between the imposing figure of Big Shaq and the fragile performance of Cassandra Whitmore. Wallace's hand hovered near his belt, not in aggression but in a gesture of preemptive control. "Sir, you need to stay where you are," he said again, louder this time, his voice laced with the weight of assumption. But amidst the rising tension, a figure edged away from the gathering. Brandon, a lanky teenager with quick hands and a curious mind, had been standing just beyond the crowd's edge. His phone, already recording the escalating scene, now shifted discreetly as he backed into the shadow of a parked van. Brandon wasn't just filming the drama unfolding with Shaq and Cassandra. His sharp eyes had caught something else. In the periphery of his frame, just as Cassandra's SUV had jolted against the curb, a blurry figure had darted away from the far side of the street. It wasn't clear, just a fleeting movement, a silhouette hunched low against the bright sunlight, but it was enough to snag Brandon's attention. His pulse quickened as he replayed the clip on his phone, zooming in and adjusting the focus. There it was, a figure in a dark jacket and cap, slipping away from the scene like a shadow. Back at the center of the confrontation, Cassandra's voice rose higher, shrill with manufactured outrage. He was driving crazy. He came out of nowhere, she insisted, her tone cracking under the strain of her own narrative. Officer Wallace, his patience thin and his stance firm, looked ready to escalate. "Sir, I'm asking you to step back now," he repeated, his words sharp enough to draw a collective gasp from the onlookers. Shaq, his jaw clenched but his voice steady, shook his head. "I was trying to prevent an accident. There's a gas leak under the road. It's not safe here." His words, though logical and calm, were swallowed by the weight of Cassandra's performance and Wallace's growing suspicion. The tension coiled tighter, an invisible noose tightening around Shaq's presence. Brandon, tucked away near the van, bit his lip, his heart hammering. He knew the narrative was shifting against Shaq, knew that the whispers of the crowd and the officer's body language painted a dangerous picture. But the footage on his phone told a different story, a story of a mysterious figure slipping away just as the crash had unfolded. Was it a coincidence, or was there a darker layer beneath the surface of this suburban drama? He crouched lower, angling his phone to capture a clearer view of the scene. His mind raced, piecing together the elements, the misaligned cones, the sudden gas leak, the hasty departure of an unknown figure. This wasn't just about a fender bender, or a false accusation. It was starting to look like something orchestrated, a setup designed to frame Shaq for reasons yet unseen. As Officer Wallace moved closer to Shaq, his hand finally resting on the butt of his taser, the crowd shifted uneasily. The delivery driver's camera tilted upward, catching the play of sunlight on the officer's mirrored lenses. Cassandra's voice hit a shrill peak. "He's going to hurt me. He's dangerous," she wailed, her words cracking with the weight of a lie she had committed to fully. But then Brandon's voice, cracking with urgency, sliced through the chaos. "Wait," he shouted, his phone raised high. The crowd turned, startled by the unexpected interruption. "I have a video. There was someone else. Someone ran off just after the crash." His words echoed through the tense air, pulling focus from the spiraling confrontation to the trembling device in his hands. Wallace hesitated, his posture stiffening, his hand pausing just shy of drawing his taser. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice sharp with skepticism. Brandon, his face flushed but determined, stepped forward, holding out his phone. "Here, look, someone was there." This wasn't just an accident. Someone set it up. A hush rippled through the crowd, as eyes turned from the exaggerated drama of Cassandra's accusations to the shaky but revealing footage on Brandon's screen. The shift was subtle but palpable, the weight of suspicion beginning to tip, the carefully constructed mask of Cassandra's performance starting to crack under the pressure of truth. Shaq met Brandon's eyes, a flicker of gratitude passing between them. The tension in his shoulders eased slightly, but the battle wasn't over. The shadowy figure caught in Brandon's footage wasn't just a twist in the story, it was the start of unraveling a deeper, darker truth that no one in the quiet suburb had expected. And as Officer Wallace's expression shifted from certainty to doubt, the stage was set for revelations that would shatter the fragile facade of this suburban drama. Shaq's deep voice, usually calm and grounded, was edged with urgency as he called out to the surrounding crowd. "Everyone, step back. There's a gas leak. This whole area isn't safe." His towering figure moved through the confusion with purpose, his gestures wide, signaling for people to clear the street. But his warnings met with scattered compliance. Many lingered, curious, their attention still hooked on Cassandra's dramatic accusations and Officer Wallace's drawn conclusions. Cassandra, her cheeks flushed with anger and fear, crossed her arms defiantly, stepping toward Shaq even as her heels clicked against the asphalt. "You're just trying to cover up what you did," she hissed, her voice shrill against the low rumble of Shaq's warnings. "You can't just shout gas leak and make everyone forget you rammed into me." The conviction in her tone cracked slightly, but her pride forced her to maintain the facade. Her eyes darted nervously around the encroaching crowd, her breath shallow. Shaq's gaze, steady and unflinching, locked onto hers.
"I didn't hit you,"
Someone set this up. But right now, none of that matters. There's a real danger here. You need to move, now. His words were crisp, each syllable pressed with the weight of genuine concern. But Cassandra, her pride and fear interwoven, clung to her narrative, shaking her head and backing away toward her idling SUV. The gas fumes, invisible but potent, whispered through the cracks of the street, threading toward Cassandra's vehicle. The afternoon sun bore down mercilessly, heating the air, creating a volatile cocktail of elements. Shaq's breath caught as he noticed the shimmer of fumes ripple beneath the vehicle's undercarriage. His pulse quickened. "Cassandra, move!" he bellowed, the sound booming across the stunned crowd. But her face, a mask of stubborn disbelief, held for 1 second too long. The spark came not from malice, but from the unlucky flicker of static electricity, a spark near the fuel line beneath her car. It was tiny, almost imperceptible, but enough to ignite the creeping gas. A burst of light, searing and brilliant, erupted from beneath the SUV, painting the surrounding street in a sudden blinding glare. The fire roared to life with a crackling sound, licking up the sides of the vehicle, feeding hungrily on the fumes. The onlookers gasped, stumbling back as the heat surged toward them. In that split second, Shaq's instincts overpowered everything else. His size, his reputation, his restraint. He lunged forward, wrapping one strong arm around Cassandra's waist, yanking her away from the vehicle, with a force that knocked the breath from her lungs. His other hand shielded her head, as he pulled her down to the pavement, his own back curving protectively to absorb the heat of the blast. The SUV's gas tank ignited with a thunderous boom, sending a plume of fire and debris skyward. The force of the explosion rippled through the neighborhood, rattling windows and setting off car alarms in a chaotic chorus. Flames danced in the air, the acrid scent of burning rubber and scorched metal filling every breath. Cassandra's shocked cry was muffled against Shaq's broad chest. The world narrowed to the sound of crackling fire, the sear of heat, and the frantic shuffle of feet, as the crowd retreated further. Officer Wallace stumbled back, his authority shattered by the reality unfolding before him. His hand dropped from his taser as he scanned the chaos, his earlier assumptions faltering under the weight of undeniable truth. For several long seconds, Shaq held Cassandra tightly, his body a barrier between her and the burning wreckage. His heartbeat pounded in his ears, but he felt the tension in her frame shift, her resistance melting into trembling shock. Slowly he helped her to her feet, his hands steady even as hers quaked. Cassandra's face, once flushed with indignation, was now pale and streaked with ash and tears. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words emerged. She stared at the smoldering remains of her vehicle, then turned her wide, disbelieving eyes to Shaq. Her breath hitched. You saved me," she whispered, the realization crashing down over her like a tidal wave. Shaq nodded, his face grave. "Didn't have a choice," he said quietly. "Didn't matter what you said, I wasn't gonna let you get hurt." His words carried a weight that stilled the murmurs of the crowd. The neighbors, once hesitant and murmuring accusations, now stared with new eyes. The earlier assumptions, the whispered biases, began to crumble under the undeniable truth of what had just unfolded. Officer Wallace, his face a mask of conflicted realization, stepped forward, his stance less certain, his tone measured. "Mr. O'Neill, we'll need to get statements. But it's clear you weren't the threat here." Cassandra, her body still trembling, nodded slowly. The pride and prejudice that had driven her accusations moments before were now fractured, the cracks visible in her unsteady gaze. She glanced at the scorched wreckage, then at Shaq, and for the first time her voice softened, touched by something almost like gratitude. "I didn't know. I didn't see the danger," she murmured, the weight of her own misjudgment heavy in her words. Shaq, his breath finally steadying, met her gaze. "Sometimes it takes a little fire to break the mask," he said quietly. His words, simple and profound, settled into the tense air as the fire hissed and smoldered behind them. And in that moment, the carefully constructed narrative of blame and bias dissolved, leaving behind only the raw truth. A man who had risked himself for a woman who had wrongly accused him, and a neighborhood forever changed by the flames that had stripped away the lies. Officer Wallace, his previously confident demeanor now clouded with discomfort, hovered near the emergency crews. His hand twitched toward his radio, but he hesitated, the weight of what was unfolding pressing against his usual instincts to control the scene. The discovery of the removed roadblock near the gas pipeline, its absence so glaringly obvious now that the fire had exposed it, was an anomaly too large to ignore. But Wallace's brow furrowed as he glanced around, his jaw tightening. The implications were dangerous, and he was not eager to follow them to their logical conclusion. Brandon, still clutching his phone, stood near the edge of the crowd, his face pale and tight with a mix of fear and determination. His footage of the incident had already gone viral online, but it was the new, anonymous message that made his hands tremble. He read it again, the simple, chilling text flashing on his screen. She was supposed to crash. Someone wanted her silenced. Keep recording. His pulse raced, the magnitude of what he had stumbled into settling on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. He glanced toward Shaq, whose broad frame stood between the fire and the gathering whispers of suspicion, and a ripple of realization coursed through him. This wasn't just a tragic accident, nor a simple misunderstanding. It was a cover-up in motion, one with stakes far beyond a local scandal. The firefighters, moving with practiced precision, extinguished the last of the flames. Water pooled around the charred remains of the SUV, reflecting distorted images of the scene. Cassandra, wrapped in a firefighter's jacket, her face a mask of shock and dawning comprehension. Shaq, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, his muscles taut beneath his simple shirt. Wallace, speaking hurriedly into his radio, his voice low and insistent. The pieces of a darker puzzle were falling into place. Brandon's breathing quickened as he imagined the layers of deceit spiraling outward from this moment. His thoughts tumbled. Cassandra's car rigged to fail, the removed roadblock, the gas leak that nearly cost lives, and now his phone buzzing again with another text. If you're smart, you'll keep quiet. This doesn't concern you. His fingers hovered over the screen, indecision flashing across his young face. But then his eyes darted back to Shaq, the man who, despite being pulled into a storm he hadn't created, remained calm and resolute, his protective instincts unwavering even in the face of danger. Shaq, meanwhile, felt the shift in the air. He noticed Wallace's forced calm, the subtle signals exchanged between emergency responders and the officer. His gut churned with the realization that the truth was being buried under layers of official-sounding explanations. Cassandra's earlier accusations, the crash, the fire, all threads leading to something deeper and more insidious. He wasn't a man prone to paranoia, but the signs were too clear to ignore. As the fire chief approached Wallace, murmuring about the suspicious absence of the roadblock and the evidence of tampering around the pipeline, Wallace's response was swift and sharp. Let's not jump to conclusions. Accidents happen. The roadblock could have been moved by pranksters or blown away. We'll get a report filed, but let's keep this contained. His voice, meant to sound reassuring, was laced with an undercurrent of warning. The chief hesitated, glancing back at the smoldering wreck, then nodded reluctantly. Cassandra, her composure fraying further, turned toward Shaq, her voice trembling. This wasn't just an accident, was it? She whispered, her eyes wide with fear and understanding dawning in equal measure. Someone wanted me gone. The realization hit her like a physical blow, her knees threatening to buckle. Shaq's jaw tightened, but he offered a steadying hand on her arm. That's what it's looking like, he said quietly, his voice low enough that only she and a few nearby could hear. His tone was calm, but beneath the surface, a storm churned, a rising tide of frustration and protectiveness. Brandon edged closer, his voice trembling but determined.
Mr. O'Neill, I got a text. Someone's warning me off, telling me this isn't just an accident. They said Cassandra's crash was planned. I've got the footage. I think I caught the person who ran off. His words spilled out in a rush, his hands trembling as he showed Shaq the message on his phone. Shaq's eyes scanned the text, his frown deepening. Who sent this? He asked, though the question hung unanswered. Brandon shook his head. No idea. It just showed up. But someone knew what was happening before it did. The realization crashed into Shaq like a silent wave. This was bigger than a simple misunderstanding. Bigger than a neighborhood dispute. Someone had orchestrated a scene meant to look like an accident, a perfect scapegoat ready to take the blame. But the plan had unraveled, not because of luck, but because of the stubborn determination of a few ordinary people who refused to look away. As the fire crews packed up and the crowd's murmurs grew louder, Wallace's voice cut through the din, his tone sharp with thinly veiled frustration. Let's wrap this up, folks. We've got a report to file. Nothing more to see here. But the words rang hollow, and Shaq's gut told him this wasn't over, not by a long shot. He glanced toward Brandon, then back at Cassandra. We need to talk, he said quietly,
his voice firm with the weight of responsibility he hadn't asked for but now couldn't walk away from. And as the fire smoke curled upward, twisting into the sky like a question mark, no one dared to answer. The first real layers of the truth began to emerge, hinting at a conspiracy far deeper and darker than anyone standing there had imagined. Shaq's deep voice broke the silence, calm but edged with a quiet gravity. "Cassandra, what's really going on here?" His question, spoken with a tone that brooked no evasion, hung heavy in the thickening dust. Cassandra's shoulders hunched, her eyes locked on the cracked pavement, as if the truth might be etched there. For a moment she said nothing. Then, with a shuddering breath, she whispered, "I've been getting messages, phone calls. They started a few weeks ago, after I refused to sell my property." Her voice cracked, and she glanced up at Shaq, her eyes shadowed with regret. "They said if I didn't sell quietly, they'd make it so I couldn't talk at all. I thought it was just empty threats. Then today," her voice faltered, trailing into a silence punctuated only by the distant hum of emergency vehicles packing up. Brandon, his youthful face pinched with disbelief, stepped closer. "Who's they? Do you know who sent the messages?" His words were rapid, but his tone betrayed the same mounting dread that was beginning to settle around them. Cassandra shook her head slowly. "It wasn't one person. It was a group, a company, I think. Developers. They've been buying up properties around here, offering just enough to make people consider but not enough to be fair. When someone refuses, things start happening. Accidents, fires, vandalism. I thought it was just bad luck, until they made it clear it wasn't." Shaq's jaw tightened. As he processed her words, the puzzle pieces snapped into place with a chilling clarity. Cassandra hadn't just been an irate neighbor with a grudge. She had been a pawn, pressured into compliance through intimidation and manipulation. The car crash, the missing roadblock, the gas leak, all threads in a web spun by forces far larger than petty neighborhood disputes. "So you were supposed to be scared into silence," Shaq murmured, his voice low, more to himself than to her. "And today was meant to shut you up for good." Cassandra's breath hitched, and she gave a small bitter laugh that held no mirth. "I didn't think it would go this far. I was scared, sure, but I never imagined they'd try to kill me in broad daylight." Her gaze flicked to Shaq, her expression a mix of gratitude and guilt. "You saved me. I should have thanked you earlier. Instead, I accused you. I let fear and old assumptions cloud my judgment." Shaq's massive shoulders lifted in a slow shrug, but his voice remained steady. "You were scared, and someone made sure you stayed that way. But now we know better, and we're going to do something about it." His words weren't loud, but they carried a weight that made Cassandra's breath catch in her throat. Brandon, his phone back in his hand, turned the screen toward them. "I've got the footage, and these texts. We can't go to the cops, not with Wallace trying to cover this up, but I know someone who might help." His voice trembled slightly, but there was steel beneath it. "My uncle's an investigative journalist. He's been digging into shady development deals for months. This might be exactly what he needs to blow the story wide open." Shaq's nod was slow but decisive. "Then we get him the information. The footage, the texts, everything. We make sure they can't bury this story like they've buried everything else." Cassandra's eyes, still rimmed with red, darted between them, her disbelief slowly giving way to a fragile hope. "You'd help me? Even after everything?" Shaq's voice was firm, his words simple. "Nobody deserves to be silenced, and nobody deserves to be blamed for trying to speak the truth." His gaze met hers, and in that moment, the lines that had divided them earlier seemed to blur, replaced by a shared understanding of fear, injustice, and the quiet courage it would take to stand against it. As the last of the fire crews rolled away, their flashing lights fading into the encroaching night, Shaq, Brandon, and Cassandra remained by the curb. The neighborhood, once buzzing with gossip and accusation, now felt different, still and charged with unspoken resolve. Somewhere behind the suburban facades, shadows moved, figures that had orchestrated a cover-up now beginning to fray under the weight of unintended exposure. The hidden players, those who had thought their power unchecked, were no longer operating in darkness. Shaq, Brandon, and Cassandra had cracked the silence open, and though the road ahead was uncertain and dangerous, they were no longer alone in the fight. The air hummed with the promise of revelations yet to come, and for the first time that day, the suffocating weight of helplessness gave way to a sliver of hope. Shaq stood tall at the heart of the town's aging municipal building, his broad figure silhouetted by the slanting light that streamed through dusty windows. The air inside was thick with the scent of old wood and the quiet tension of secrets on the verge of unraveling. Flanked by Brandon, whose determined grip on his phone concealed the evidence they had gathered, and Cassandra, whose face was pale with both guilt and resolve, they faced Officer Wallace and two men in immaculate suits, the developer's lawyers. The lawyers, their expressions a practiced mix of charm and veiled threats, leaned back in their chairs, as if confident this impromptu confrontation would crumble like so many before it. Wallace, arms crossed, tried to project authority, but his shifting gaze betrayed a flicker of doubt. Shaq's voice, low and steady, cut through the stale air. "We know what you've been covering up," he said, his words landing like heavy stones in a still pond. "The roadblock, the rigged crash, the threats against Cassandra, it's all in here." He gestured toward Brandon, who without a word played the captured footage on his phone. The grainy video showed the shadowy figure removing the barrier near the pipeline, followed by the unmistakable outline of Cassandra's SUV moments. Before the explosion, gasps echoed faintly from the staff lingering nearby, drawn by the escalating confrontation. Cassandra's voice, quiet but resolute, broke through the tense silence. "I was targeted because I wouldn't sell. They were going to silence me, and anyone who tried to stop them." The lawyers exchanged quick, uneasy glances. Wallace's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, his earlier confidence visibly eroding. Brandon stepped forward, his youthful voice tinged with both defiance and urgency. "And there's more. We got a text. Anonymous, but it points to someone higher up, someone who wanted Cassandra out of the way. Someone who's supposed to protect this community, not sell it out." A beat of silence passed, heavy with unspoken truths. Then from behind a door near the back of the chamber, a new figure emerged. Cassandra's breath caught audibly as her brother Mitchell Lennox, a sharp-dressed city councilman known for his affable charm and quiet influence, stepped into view. His confident stride faltered ever so slightly as he took in the scene. "Mitchell," Cassandra whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of betrayal. "It was you." Mitchell's practiced smile flickered, revealing a flash of something colder beneath. "Cassandra, you're overreacting. It was never supposed to go this far. It's just business. You didn't understand what was at stake." His voice, smooth and dismissive, belied the gravity of the situation. These developers were offering opportunities, new jobs, revitalization. You were standing in the way of progress. Shaq's fists clenched at his sides, though he kept his stance controlled. "Progress," he repeated, his tone sharp with disbelief. "You were willing to sacrifice your own sister's safety for a payout? For a project that would erase this neighborhood's history and community?" Mitchell's gaze hardened. "I did what I had to, and I'm not the only one. There are others people who depend on this deal, who stand to lose everything if it falls through. You think you're a hero, Shaq? You think exposing this will make it all go away? It'll just make things messier." Brandon's phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced down, his eyes widening as he read the message. He met Shaq's gaze. "It's from the source. They're ready to talk on the record. They can confirm everything. The cover-up, the council's involvement, even the threats. It's bigger than we thought." Cassandra's knees buckled, but Shaq's steady hand on her arm kept her upright. Her voice, though trembling, was resolute. "You sold me out, Mitchell. Our family. Everything Dad and Mom built here. For what? So you could be the hero of a rigged story?" Mitchell's facade cracked further, his shoulders slumping as the weight of his choices bore down on him. But even as the walls he'd built around his conscience began to crumble, he offered no apology. "It's too late to undo it," he said quietly. "You've already pulled the thread. The whole thing's going to come down." Shaq's voice, calm yet cutting, sealed the moment. "Then let it fall. People deserve the truth, no matter how messy it gets." His words resonated with the quiet power of a man who'd seen too many cover-ups, too many injustices, smothered beneath money and influence. The room seemed to shift, the balance of power teetering on the edge. Wallace, finally understanding the futility of his silence, exhaled heavily and stepped back. The lawyers, their confident posture gone, gathered their papers, exchanging hushed, urgent words. As the municipal building's doors opened to the growing crowd outside, drawn by whispered rumors of the confrontation, the truth stood poised to escape the confines of whispered threats and shadowy deals. And standing at the heart of it all, Shaq, Cassandra, and Brandon braced for the fallout of revelations that could not be silenced, their bond forged not by convenience but by a shared determination to stand against the creeping corruption that threatened to consume their community. The first hints of dawn painted the suburban sky in muted pastels, but the streets below were far from quiet. Word of the truth, the crash, the cover-up, the threats had spread like wildfire overnight. Social media lit up with hashtags demanding justice, recounting Shaq's quiet heroism, and the unsettling revelations about the developers and the city council's entanglement. In video clips posted from the municipal building, his calm but firm words resonated louder than any headline: "People deserve the truth, no matter how messy it gets." By mid-morning, the neighborhood pulsed with an energy unlike anything it had known before. Residents who had once glanced past each other in the supermarket aisles now gathered in clusters along sidewalks and front yards. Signs appeared in windows, painted hastily but boldly. "No more silence. Justice for our neighborhood." Shaq stood up. "Now we will too." The murmur of conversations mixed with the distant sound of car horns and the crackle of portable speakers as local activists, long silenced by the weight of bureaucracy and influence, found their voices. Shaq, despite his towering presence, moved quietly through the swelling crowd. His face was lined with fatigue, but determined, his interactions gentle as he greeted familiar faces and strangers alike. He was no longer just the basketball legend or the beloved local figure. He was the catalyst that had cracked the facade of quiet compliance wide open. At the heart of the gathering, a makeshift stage had been set up on the community center's front steps. Microphones buzzed as neighborhood leaders, faith figures, and concerned citizens stepped forward to share their stories. Some spoke of years of quiet pressure from the developers, whispered threats to sell or face complications. Others shared memories of lost homes and businesses, of loved ones bullied into silence. Their words, once fragmented and hidden behind closed doors, now wove together into a tapestry of shared resilience. Cassandra, her face pale but determined, stood near the stage's edge, flanked by neighbors who had once eyed her with suspicion but now offered quiet support. Her earlier role in the unfolding drama was not forgotten, but it had been reframed. She was no longer the antagonist in a simple tale of accusation and redemption. She was a woman who had been used, frightened, and ultimately saved by the very man she had once wrongfully accused. Her voice, when she finally stepped to the microphone, trembled but carried clear. "I was scared into silence, but Shaq stood by me, and by all of us. Now it's our turn to stand by each other." Brandon stood nearby, holding his phone high to record the proceedings, his young face shining with a mixture of pride and determination. He was no longer just the kid with a knack for gadgets. He was a chronicler of truth, his footage sparking conversations far beyond the neighborhood. His uncle, the journalist, had promised to amplify their story, but Brandon knew it was their collective voices that would carry the message the furthest. As the crowd swelled, an air of cautious defiance settled over them. Banners fluttered in the morning breeze, faces turned resolute under the weight of shared purpose. Yet amid the unity, tension simmered. A few unmarked cars, their tinted windows betraying official presence, lurked at the periphery. Officer Wallace, stripped of his earlier authority and facing mounting scrutiny, was nowhere to be seen. His absence spoke volumes, a silent testament to the crumbling grip of those who had wielded power without accountability. Shaq stepped onto the stage, his large hands steadying the microphone stand. His voice, though not raised, carried across the crowd with the gravity of lived experience. "I'm not here to be anyone's hero," he said. "I'm here because this is home. And when something threatens the people you care about, the neighbors, the kids, the businesses that make a place feel like family, you don't stand back. You step up. Not because it's easy, but because it's right." The applause that followed wasn't loud or frenzied, but steady and heartfelt. It was the sound of a community finding its voice, of fears dissolving into collective determination. And beneath it all ran a quiet current of anticipation. What came next? They had uncovered the lies, stood up against the threats, but the developers and their allies wouldn't fade into the background without a fight. The battle was only beginning, and they knew it. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the gathering, a ripple passed through the crowd. A group of uniformed officers approached, not with weapons drawn, but with a cautious deference. The lead officer, a woman whose badge gleamed in the sunlight, raised her hands to indicate she came not as a threat. "We've seen the footage," she called out, her voice carrying over the murmurs. "The department's launching an investigation." We're here to make sure everyone stays safe while we sort through the evidence. There was no cheer, no immediate celebration. Only a shared glance of weary resolve among the crowd. They knew this was just the beginning. That justice was a journey measured not in moments of confrontation, but in persistent, everyday courage. As Shaq stepped down from the stage, Cassandra moved to stand beside him, her posture no longer one of defeat, but of solidarity. Brandon fell into step with them, his phone still recording, capturing the story that was no longer just his or Shaq's, or Cassandra's. It belonged to all of them. The uprising had begun not with violence, but with truth spoken into silence. And though the path ahead was uncertain, and undoubtedly fraught with new challenges, the community had made its choice clear. They would no longer be silent, and they would no longer stand alone. The tension of past days had dissolved into an atmosphere of cautious optimism. Children, once confined to backyards, played basketball at the reopened court, their laughter echoing against brick walls and iron fences. Their games were punctuated by shouts of encouragement, the bouncing ball a steady rhythmic pulse that replaced the silence of fear. Shaq's gaze softened as he watched, the easy camaraderie of the kids a stark contrast to the charged confrontations of just days before. Neighbors now greeted each other with a newfound respect. Where once doors had remained half-closed and eyes averted, now there were waves from porches, nods across the street, and conversations that ventured beyond polite pleasantries. The change wasn't miraculous or sweeping, but it was real, a shift born from the raw honesty the community had been forced to face. Cassandra, once so sure of her assumptions, had changed too. Though her apology at the gathering had been halting and her eyes clouded with lingering regret, her actions since had spoken louder. She was seen alongside others, organizing a memorial to honor those lost, not just in the explosion's aftermath but to the deeper systemic injustices that had long haunted the neighborhood. Her presence, though still met with some skepticism, was a reminder of the complexity of redemption, that it was neither instant nor perfect, but a process requiring humility and persistence. As the community gathered at the site chosen for the memorial, a quiet green space once slated for development, Shaq's thoughts turned inward. The stage had been set, speeches made, but he remained at the edge of the gathering, his large frame blending into the backdrop of young saplings and carefully arranged benches. He wasn't there for recognition or applause. He was there because this was home, because standing with his neighbors mattered more than any headline. The ceremony's final words were spoken by a local pastor, her voice resonant with a quiet power. "We gather not to forget what was nearly lost," she said, "but to honor the truth that was uncovered and the resilience it inspired. This memorial is a promise, not just of remembrance, but of action." As her voice faded, a collective hush settled, broken only by the rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. Just as the crowd began to disperse, a small, neatly sealed envelope was slipped into Shaq's hand by an elderly man in a tailored suit, who had stood quietly at the perimeter throughout the ceremony. Shaq glanced down at the unfamiliar handwriting, the weight of the envelope surprisingly light in his hand. He waited until he was alone, seated on the edge of a nearby planter, to carefully open it. Inside was a single sheet of thick paper, its edges yellowed, but the ink bold and clear. The words were brief but carried a weight that made Shaq's breath catch. "Shaquille, you've always known how to stand tall. What you didn't know was why it comes so naturally. Your grandfather, Thomas O'Neill, was one of the original founders of this neighborhood. He built the first basketball court here, organized the first community garden. He fought for this place before you were born. Now it's your turn to carry on his legacy." The signature was simple, an initial followed by a familiar name from childhood stories, L.M. O'Neill. Shaq's mother's handwriting. Lucille had known all along. The realization settled over him, like a comforting weight, a connection that reached back through generations. It wasn't just about the crash, the gas leak, the lies and threats. It was about a deeper fight, one his family had been part of long before he had even been born. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Shaq folded the letter carefully and slipped it into his pocket. The kids' basketball game had resumed, the ball arcing high against the fading sky. Cassandra stood nearby, her face drawn but resolute, as she spoke quietly with one of the community organizers. Brandon, his phone finally pocketed, was now playing catch with a group of younger kids, his earlier footage still spreading online, a testament to courage and truth. Shaq rose, his silhouette momentarily backlit by the warm glow of streetlights coming on one by one. His steps were sure as he rejoined the flow of the neighborhood. his role no longer just as a towering figure of physical strength, but as a symbol of something more enduring. He was now a bridge between past and present, a living testament to resilience, justice, and the quiet power of standing for what's right. The story wasn't over, but the chapter had closed with clarity. And as the first stars appeared overhead, his neighborhood moved forward, bound not by silence or fear, but by shared truth and the promise of redemption. The truth doesn't stop at one story. It's in your hands to question, to act, to make sure the next headline isn't just another cover-up. This isn't the end, it's the beginning of real change. Stand up, speak out, and be the voice your community needs now.